Jim,
We're on.
monitor.
We're on. We're on. We're on.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Didn't have the monitor. We're on.
Not on.
No,
We're on, but just the monitor's not on.
but we're on. That's all. Okay, we're on?
Yeah, we're on.
Start talking.
That's what I'm saying.
Start talking. We're on.
The monitor just isn't on. We're on air. Right
Oh.
now.
We're on there. Start talking.
Can we go ahead?
Yes.
Okay, greetings everyone. Welcome to the Independent Producers Live Showcase. We have a very special show tonight. It's to do with no on 106. Vote no on 106. I want to introduce all my people here at the table. My co-host, Bruce Broussard. Next to him, Courtney Graham. And next to me, Ann Doe. And I'm Richard Carpenter. And we're going to hear from Ann first as to the particulars on this. Vote no on 106.
Thank you so much for having us on tonight. So Measure 106 is a constitutional amendment that is going to be on your ballot this November. It restricts access to reproductive health care for some of the most vulnerable Oregonians. Make no mistake, Measure 106 is a backdoor ban on abortion. It cuts access to abortion care from folks on the Oregon Health Plan as well as public employees, and making it so that only those who can afford to access abortion care are able to do so. A right is not a right unless you can afford to access it. This is a measure that seeks to undo 40 years worth of Oregon's values of making sure that abortion is safe, legal, and accessible to all Oregonians. And it's really important, is now more than ever, given the national climate, that we all vote no on Measure 106.
Okay. I think that's in the simplest term.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, it was either 3 or 4 years ago, there was another thing against freedom of choice. It was a whole measure, and it went on, and we had to, I think I did the same thing. I had NARAL come here and go over it again. So none of this happens all at once. All I know is it's been such a long fight for all these people. There's nothing quick about it. I especially like this part here. It says here, the Constitution's guarantee against the government control of our personal lives, against moral judgment from the White House, from the Congress, from the state houses, from the courts. It is a national promise that women can choose whether or not to have a child, without condemnation, without fear, without judgment, forever and ever. That's what we believed, and we were wrong. So even this is another example of what we're trying to deal with. We can follow the road to a world in which a woman is in full citizenship with complete freedom to choose her own reproductive course. And that's what this is about.
Absolutely. Measure 106 would interfere in a woman's ability to make these serious medical decisions. It interferes with her ability to do, it basically inserts itself, it inserts voters and politics into the doctor's exam room. These choices should be left to a woman. We trust, and Oregonians have always trusted women to be able to make these decisions in consultation with their medical providers, in their faith and their family. And we trust that Oregon voters are going to continue to stand up for women's ability to choose whether and when to become a parent, regardless of their income or their health care coverage.
What should women turn to for financial help, shall we say?
Well, we are grateful that in Oregon we have always been of the mind that everyone should be able to access health care regardless of what you make. And as recently as January, Oregon voters have overwhelmingly shown with Measure 101 that they believe that Oregonians deserve to have access to the full range of health care. In Oregon, that has included the full range of reproductive health care. In Oregon, I think we've been really proud to stand by our beliefs that everyone should be able to access all of reproductive health care, from postpartum to prenatal to cancer screenings and abortion care, through our health insurance coverage.
This is one of the things I was going to try to do. I'm still kind of working on it, to get Planned Parenthood to come in and kind of go over all the things that they have to offer. I mean, there's a difference between, you know, getting an abortion, and even though they're involved in that, and just kind of the surface things they do when you go in and say, like husband and wife, and they want some help on what to better prepare themselves for. So, yeah, that's and this is, you know, it's of course been going on for a while.
Absolutely.
I've been involved with NARL for probably 20 years. Planned Parenthood, 10 or 15. I just usually try to go to some of their events. You know, one of the things that I always think about, I went to the, I wish I could think of her name. It was Sarah, something like Severson, that won the Roe v. Wade, 7-2. I'll never understand how you can overturn a 7-2 decision in the Supreme Court. I'll never, or even think about it. These guys, oh, gee, now we can get in there and overturn that. Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they just have to take it easy. It's just not going to happen that quick.
Yeah. Abortion access we've seen be chipped away state by state. So even with Roe v. Wade as the law of the land, we've seen in different states extremists attacking access to abortion by inserting unfair laws. And already in different states, we see women having to travel great distances, take time off of work, pay for transportation, pay for housing costs, accommodations, in order to get abortion care. And that's something that we're trying to prevent from happening in Oregon. Again, a right is not a right if you cannot access it. And what Measure 106 is doing is trying to put abortion access out of reach from low-income women. And I think that it's really important to center how this would disproportionately impact folks who are on the Oregon Health Plan. We have seen a CBS study recently showed that half of Americans cannot afford a $500 unexpected expense without having to sell their belongings or go into debt. So when we're talking about the real impact of what this measure would do, it would be to put abortion care out of reach from low-income women by making it too expensive and not covered by their insurance. And this is something that is a real step backwards from where Oregon has been traditionally for decades at this point. And I think the concerns about Roe v. Wade are very relevant, but I think we also have to really look at how, on a state-by-state level, we've already seen abortion access and abortion rights being chipped away by measures exactly like the one that we're confronting on the November ballot, which is why it's so important that we take a stand in Oregon and hold the line and vote no.
I think sometimes some states or some people go to some states and say, I'll bet we can get an anti-abortion thing in this way or this way.
Yeah.
I think they do that. We are so fortunate to have what we have, and to have young people be able to go and get abortion when they need it. All this other stuff is all designed to delay and make it difficult for someone. Why is it so important that they make some woman bring a child to term that may not be wanted, may end up in the criminal system when it gets older? I always visualize that's happening to someone that wasn't wanted. It just always seems like a natural next step or whatever. So
And I think that's worth noting why Measure 106 is particularly cruel. It's not, like in some other states, it's not an outright ban on abortion. It's not some of the trap laws like you see in other states, targeted regulations on abortion providers that at their face are really designed to reduce access by chipping away at the edges of access. Yeah. It's very specifically targeting low-income women in the state of Oregon who rely on the state to get their health care. And in many cases, these are women who are seeking access to abortion because they already have children, because there are other circumstances that prevent them from wanting to bring another child into their family. And so it's very specifically designed to limit access to abortion for those women, low-income women in the state of Oregon. And I think that's why it's particularly harmful and why it is really critical, as Anne said, to hold the line in Oregon this year.
Distance is a big problem. When you have women that are in the distant places of Oregon, that don't have access, that's part of the problem they have to overcome. They can overcome it a little better if they don't have to wait 2 or 3
Right.
stupid days, something like that.
Right.
And that's better.
Yeah.
That happens. So,
And we know that the ability to choose whether and when to become a parent is
Yeah.
a basic right and the foundation for individuals and their families to be able to have economic security, to thrive, to prosper. Oregonians have always trusted women and their families to make these decisions. We will continue to always to trust women to make these decisions. And in trusting those women to make these decisions, we all have to vote no on Measure 106.
that's right. I just want to read something here. Women like Margaret Sanger, who awakened the conscience of the nation and the plight of American women, enduring the responsibilities of family life without birth control. This one, this paragraph that I'm going to read, this is when I read something like this and I have to stop reading because I get so upset. Women like Rosa Parks, who risked their lives to give African Americans the same rights as other Americans. Women who sat at the lunch counters. Women who led their children into white-only schools. Women who got knocked down and beaten crossing Selma's Bridge. No wonder I get to the point where I can't go on reading after I read stuff like that. This is from previous president of NARAL, Kate Michelman, who I always admired, and she talks about how important, well, all these points that you're making. They're just, and so, is there anything else that we should know about finance when women go in to get an abortion that they need to know? Because
Well, I think the reason that we find Measure 106 and voting no on Measure 106 such a critical decision to make this November is that, as Anne already said, we know that over 50% of American families can't afford an unexpected expense of $500 without going into debt or selling something. Abortion care as part of health care does carry a cost. And when folks are denied access to that, we see that it doesn't make abortion go away. It means that folks are having to travel farther for the care that they need. It
Yeah.
means that they're having to raise money from friends and family. And in Oregon, in addition to the fact that we've been providing this care for the past 4 decades, we also require private insurance companies to cover abortion just like any other health care. And so to chip away at this access for specifically folks on state-funded plans, so folks on the Oregon Health Plan or folks who have other kinds of state-funded care like teachers, nurses, firefighters, and other public servants, is to create a category of haves and have-nots when it comes to insurance coverage in the state of Oregon, which sets a precedent that I don't think any of us would agree with, because we shouldn't have politics playing a game where we're picking and choosing what kinds of medical procedures are covered by insurance or not. And we want folks to be able to go into the doctor to get the care that they need and have the confidence that it's going to be covered by their insurance without having to wonder whether or not it's something that's been carved out of their health care.
And this is a backdoor ban on abortion, and they're trying to achieve. The proponents of Measure 106 say that this could be the first pro-life bill in Oregon. So I take them at their word, right? That they will not be satisfied with just this backdoor ban on abortion that targets very cruelly, specifically low-income women on the Oregon Health Plan. I think that we have to be very vigilant, particularly in the times that we live in. But also, this is also what Courtney was saying, it's a matter of not reinstituting a category of haves and have-nots within our healthcare system, in which only the folks who are able to afford access to abortion care are allowed to access that abortion care. This is it's a dangerous precedent to cherry pick what medical procedures will or will not be covered under insurance in a state where we have traditionally and consistently voted to expand access to health care to all Oregonians and to vote down any attempts to restrict access to safe and legal abortion.
Yeah. And I think particularly when you're talking about the context of viewing Oregon as a testing ground for some of these measures. These are groups that see Oregon as this state where they can bring some of these nasty measures, and if they can manage to get them across the finish line and pass something like Measure 106, I think I would see it as sort of a bellwether. It would mean that other groups in other states would try passing similar measures, and that here in Oregon we would probably see some of the same sort of nasty attacks that we've seen in the past. Because, for example, this is not the first time we've seen a measure like Measure 106. Oregonians have voted on funding measures as it relates to abortion care at least 2 other times in our history. This measure, they tried to qualify 3 other times before they got on the ballot this year. We've seen multiple attempts to chip away at access by instituting parental notifications or other kinds of notification laws in the state of Oregon. And it is absolutely a part of a larger coordinated strategy. And so I personally don't want to live in a world in which Measure 106 passes and we have to see what other kinds of attacks come our way at other kinds of healthcare in particular. I think when you think about Oregon's history of nasty ballot measures, we've had anti-LGBTQ measures, we've had other kinds of measures that attempt to chip away at individual rights. And in a world in which Measure 106 passes, I don't want to see what kinds of measures will come back down the pipeline.
You said something about 3 different.
This was their 4th try trying to get this measure on the ballot because it was so hard to get enough Oregonians to sign their petition.
And they
that it
barely
took them-
qualified
yeah.
it. It was like very close. I think they had like 221 signatures over what the threshold was to qualify this ballot measure. But it's so important that everyone votes this November. I think that this midterm is extremely important, but particularly with the fights that we're seeing in Oregon, and because of what Courtney was just saying about Oregon being a bellwether, as Oregon being a testing ground, it is so crucial, not just for the Oregonians that would be impacted, the hundreds of thousands of Oregonians that would be impacted by Measure 106, but also the precedent that it sets in the country. Oregon has been a leader in terms of reproductive health care. This would be a huge step backwards in that leadership, and it's up to all of us as voters to defend Oregonians' rights to be able to access all the health care that they need, regardless of how much they make or regardless of how they're insured.
You know, one area I'd like to maybe say we should share with the viewing audience is the definition of Roe versus Wade.
Sure.
I think that's a very important piece because too often it's not taught in schools. And you know, and in most cases, they're older individuals, and the politics are there, but the majority of the voters are not as familiar with its origin and its purpose, and why it's so political, and where it is today. Want to share some of that?
Go for it.
It's interesting to think about how to provide a succinct summary of what Roe versus Wade is. I think the shortest summary is that Roe versus Wade was a court case brought before the Supreme Court, 1973. Was that the year that it was brought forward?
Yeah.
That essentially said that there was no place for the government to be getting in between women and access to safe and legal abortion care, and that states could not erect laws to get in the way, and that it was something that what's the better way to summarize it?
So previously, states had been able to decide whether or not abortion would be legal,
Legal,
and Oregon, once again, was on the forefront of legalizing abortion in the state. What Roe v. Wade did was it set a precedent that allowed abortion to be legal in all of the states. What we have seen also is that abortion actually is not that controversial. 7 out of 10 Americans support with like maintaining this precedent that keeps abortion safe and legal by upholding Roe versus Wade. We also have seen that among millennials, the shift is even more dramatic in terms of supporting a woman's ability to decide whether and when to become a parent. 1 in 4 women will have an abortion. This is something that is common. It is a common part of healthcare that a lot of people have used, that there is a really broad support for. And I think that there is a lot of noise that is made by extremists to try to make this seem less of, like it's on less solid ground. But what we've seen is that the vast majority of Americans support a woman's ability to be in charge of her reproductive destiny and to have reproductive freedom in a real way.
Yeah, and maybe what would be more helpful would be to situate Roe in Oregon's history. So I think something that's important to understand is that I believe since 1969, abortion has been legal in Oregon. Oregon decided to step forward at a time that other states were trying to criminalize access to abortion, which is where Roe came from. But before Roe even happened, Oregon legalized access to abortion in 1969, and then we saw Roe happen nationally in 1973, essentially saying that states could not erect outright bans. That brought forth the birth of the movement to chip away at abortion access at the fringes because they couldn't outright make abortion criminalized.
Right.
So you see the trap laws, you see the 20-week abortion bans, you see these other kinds of laws happening in individual states. And then federally, you see the Hyde Amendment, which prevents any federal funding from being used to pay for abortion care, except in very limited circumstances. And then Oregon, following that decision, decided to step up and say, we disagree. We actually think that low-income women who at the time were on Medicaid deserve access to abortion care. And there was a law, or sort of, I think it was a law that was passed. It was also a court case that essentially said, Oregon is making this decision to provide this care for low-income women. And since that time, so for decades now, we've been providing this care to women in the state of Oregon, which is why it's particularly frustrating that you see these kinds of attacks here. Because I think for many folks, and we've seen a lot of, you sort of referenced older generations of women coming out and engaging in Measure 106, who are asking themselves, why are we continuing to have this conversation? It feels like a conversation that was resolved decades ago, particularly in the state of Oregon, which is why I think it's particularly frustrating for folks to see Measure 106 on the ballot this year.
And we have seen also across the nation, abortion rates are on the decline, and that is also true for Oregon. Abortion rates in Oregon have been on the decline for years, and that's because we've expanded access to reproductive health care and can provide contraception as well as quality, comprehensive, medically accurate, age-appropriate sex education. And that, I think, really we need to pay attention to the fact that we should not be attempting to put any restrictions to access to abortion. Also, in this suite of like allowing folks to access all the reproductive health care that they need, we have seen abortion rates on the decline as well. So when proponents of Measure 106 are trying to push their agenda by saying, you know, we need to stop funding of abortion care, they're also ignoring the fact that abortions have been on the decline, both nationally and in Oregon. But they're also trying to obscure the real agenda of trying to chip away at abortion rights in Oregon.
Okay, let me read on that. Those who would take America back in a time of no choice permeate the fabric of our social and political institutions. They're often self-righteous, intolerant, even hateful. They preach from the pulpit. They sit in county courthouses. They are elected to hospital boards. They picket our clinics. They sit in our state legislatures. They govern our state houses. And now they control. They can't reverse Roe because they don't control the Supreme Court, so they come from the fringes. They attacked at the edges. This weakened the foundation. Their target is not so much abortion, but women themselves. I think that's part of the problem. Punishing the most desperate at first, the most in need, the silent women, young, poor, and isolated, women forced to choose between enduring an unwanted pregnancy or facing social retribution. That was from Kate Michelman, and that is something she was really on. The women that were way out and needed help the worst.
And that's exactly the women that Measure 106 would be taking away health care from. Those are the exact people that Measure 106 would be impacting.
There some other states. Isn't Mississippi the worst state or one of the worst? Some of them, I know, they were trying to chase out the last abortion clinic. They're unbelievable.
Yeah, I think what's so chilling about those words is, I believe the date for that is January 20th of 2000. here we sit in October of 2018, and so much of what she said still resonates today.
That's
and I
right.
think what is particularly challenging in this moment in time, this date, is that we have seen the appointment of Supreme Court Justice and Brett Kavanaugh, who absolutely, I think, is motivated and does have the ability to turn the tide, to potentially have the ability to overturn Roe versus Wade.
You know,
and I think there's so
I
much
gotta
at
say,
stake.
I could never figure that out. He said, I thought he was said for existing law. In other words, if Roe v. Wade was an existing law, he would go along with that. Am I missing something on that, or?
I think that there is a sense nationally, and I think particularly in the medical community, that there is a very real chance that they will vote in the next year to overturn Roe versus Wade. And there's a case heading toward the Supreme Court right now that has the ability to do so, and I think that's why it's so critical that states like Oregon continue to lead the way by holding the line against state-level attacks and leading the charge nationally and setting sort of a model for other states for how to protect access to abortion. In 2017, Oregon actually passed a law that codified in statute that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, folks in Oregon would not lose access to abortion. Now, that was statutory. This is a constitutional amendment, so that's why it's so critical to defeat Measure 106.
Oh, okay. That meant that abortion was still legal as the way it was set up by the
Yeah.
Supreme Court. By the way, that's January 23rd, 1973, right?
Yeah.
That's the Roe v. Wade date. That's the day that NARAL, or maybe even Planned Parenthood, try to go to luncheons and celebrate and do something, because it does cause for celebration.
I think that Courtney's point about this being a constitutional amendment is very important as well. It is a poorly written measure, and it defines medically necessary in a way that is vague, that doesn't define who determines what is medically necessary, which opens up the possibility of really politicizing these serious medical decisions that should be made between a woman in consultation with her medical provider. I think they also define medically necessary as threatening the life of a woman. There are such an array of complications that can arise in which the health of a woman would be severely compromised, but none of that would be sufficient enough to meet the bar of medically necessary, which then would require families to try to gather enough funds to be able to pay for a medical procedure to maintain the health and well-being of a woman and her family. And we just don't think that that is what Oregon stands for, which is why we think everyone should vote no on Measure 106, because we don't need that in our Constitution. We're not about inserting that sort of inequity into our state's Constitution.
How do they communicate abortion issues with in the poorly social kind of a situation with women? You know what I mean by that is that let's say poor women or those who are incarcerated, you know, that nature, and I think about that. I also think about just other things that comes up. You know, you read every so often about things like people are concerned about the whole issue of adoption. You know, and the women were adopting outside of the U.S., you know, and there was a purity thing. There was all sorts of things in regards to various small groups saying, well, this is why I'm against it. Then you got parents, grandparents, and that kind of a situation. So we've gone through cycles, but at the same time is that, you know, how do you communicate? You know, how do you communicate to all those various entities? Because they're still offsprings, if you will. They still love them all and whatever. But some folks have pretty hardcore issues. And we've got the religious crowd. We've got that whole era aspect of it, and that's a large unit. And then we've got the baby boomers, you know. And I mean, I can go on and on, but you get my drift, if you will. You know
I
what mean?
think we feel very strongly that no matter how you feel about abortion, it should be a choice that's left up to a woman, her family, and her medical provider. And I think that we want abortion to stay safe and legal and accessible so that women have the whole menu of choices when it comes to deciding when and whether to become a parent, to choose to become a parent, to carry a child to term and bring in their child into the world, to choose adoption, to choose abortion. We think that all choices should be available to women, and to take one choice away creates a set of false choices, and doesn't give women the freedom to be trusted to make decisions that are right for them and their family.
The decision to become a parent is intensely personal, and I think that it is something that should be made privately without necessarily having other people's opinions legislate what you get to decide for your own life. And I think that's at its core. Like, everyone is able to choose how they feel about abortion for themselves. It's about allowing people to make those decisions about whether and when to become a parent for themselves without putting undue burden or barriers into that person's way. We also have found that, restricting access to abortion doesn't mean that people have fewer abortions. What it means is that it makes getting an abortion more dangerous. So in a place like Texas with House Bill 2 that really decimated the ability to access an abortion for women in Texas, you see rates of self-induced abortions going up between the time that bill passed until now. And that's so dangerous to women's health. But that is sort of the desperation and the level of need for access to care that these women are experiencing, but they are unable to get that care in a safe way, but they're still trying, right? And so we don't want to put folks in Oregon in a position where they have to resort to some of the sort of extreme measures that women in Texas feel like they need to in order to get the care that they deserve.
Because again, in the southern parts of our country, in many ways, it is major family along that line, in two ways. When I think about myself at my age at this point in time, but I was born and raised in Louisiana, and the wealth of a person or a family was based on the number of kids you had to pick up the crop. I mean, that's just the way it was. You know what I'm saying? And that's that mindset. In many ways, that was there, but the transitioning, if you will, the transition was after the Cotton situation, right after the Lincoln situation aspect of it, and I think that was kind of like a start, so to speak. That's just my. I'm just throwing that out there on the table. But there's a lot of history in that piece, and so how do you get to our progressive way of life today? And like you said, we still. And I'm going from one point to the other, but try to bear with me a bit. But we all have to survive, and with the way our lifestyle is, that you've got to achieve, you got to be somebody, and it doesn't talk to pairing, it talks to individualism, And I've got to be someone. I just can't have any kids, and naturally it falls on. Well, you got to have the kids because I want kids, but why don't you just wait for me? And I'll just go on, well, you stay home, and that old traditional situation. But like I say, everybody now are being told that you have to be progressive. It's not just a male or a female. It's a me. You know what I mean? And I think that's another era that we're dealing with, because folks are saying, and I've heard another area that I'd heard, and there was a discussion that I'd heard, was that sometimes women and men both are in that major progressive kind of a mindset, and then all of a sudden the woman sacrifices and says, okay, I'm not going to have any kids, and then all of a sudden later on in life, all of a sudden it becomes an issue. Well, what happened to me? I'm at this age now, I want my child. A lot of pressure from parents, if you will, saying, where are my grandkids, and this, that, and then all due respect, and then you got the whole issue of the gays, the movements, all that kind of thing that just puts in there. And then you got individuals running in that arena. So there's a lot of things that can be discussed around this issue. But I granted, that there is a difference. My position has always been, look, I can't bear a child, so that's not my issue. It has to be the responsibility of the female side, and that's the person who has to make that decision. You know what I mean? But that's something that I think that. We've talked about, but it depends upon, but it's just our way of life here in this country. that we're constantly struggling and surviving, and then we're now we're just equal. Everybody's on the same path, but at some point in time in my life, I want to get married, and then my mate doesn't want to, or vice versa. You get my point? Then it's why bother? Why care? You know, let's just get rid of folks. The pill. I mean, I'm giving that side so we can have that. That's the discussion we need to get to the lay person that's out there. The well-to-do person has no issue along that line. They can do an abortion any day of the week. Doctor so-and-so happens to be someone I know, I went to school with, take care of it, John, no problem. But the other person who's sitting there and saying, okay, fine, I can't get a job, this, that, and the other, I'm on welfare, and it's in our society that they will pay me to be able to get, if I had more kids, I'd get more money. I mean, that's in the poor community aspect of it. So they've got these kids, I'm saying, you got me, no responsibility, no meal around the house type of a situation, and I can go on, but I'm just throwing something out for the discussion because I think that's what we need to do, and we're not teaching this in school. We're not talking about it. It's all about progression. It's all about perks. It's all about toys and this, that, and the other, and just having fun and having a blast. And then at some point in time in life, someone says, "Hey, where's my grandkid?" Or if you will, a female says, "Gee whiz, I want to have a child," and all of a sudden she goes in and says, "Look, I want to have a child. I can't have one." Then how do I find my mate in that kind of a situation? But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out on the table. Any thoughts?
Well, I think that when you're talking about how we best take care of everyone, you're talking about this sort of collective community effort and like how we are able to support each other. I think that one of the things that what is really amazing about No Cuts to Care, the No Measure 106 campaign, is that we have a really robust coalition of trusted organizations, over 100 trusted organizations, businesses, and elected officials. And a lot of the trusted organizations that we work with are advocates on all sides of helping to protect families, to get fair wages, to get paid sick leave off. There are like a myriad of issues that our coalition partners engage in to make sure that families have all the options available to them to be healthy, to be prosperous, and to thrive. And I think it's indicative of how important maintaining access to abortion care as part of the full range of reproductive health care is to that entire picture of uplifting communities and of uplifting families and like in equipping families to be able to thrive and to be able to have opportunity, that we have so many of those coalition partners in our No Cuts to Care campaign to fight Measure 106. We have folks who have been doing a lot of social justice, racial justice, reproductive justice work, who are really concerned about the dangerous precedent that Measure 106 sets, not only just with cherry picking what insurance will cover, but also in the ways that it is attempting to target some of the most vulnerable Oregonians. I think that what we can all agree on is that we all want families to be able to thrive in our Oregon. And I think that in order for all of our families to be able to thrive in our Oregon, they need to be able to make the decisions that are best for them. And so at the end of the day, what this is about allowing families to make those decisions for themselves without having to worry about the additional burden of costs. None of us know what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. Every situation is unique. We cannot sort of place our values onto other folks. I think that what we're here to say is that Measure 106 is against Oregon's values, and that it unfairly targets low-income Oregonians, as well as Oregonians that receive state-funded health insurance, including nurses, teachers, and firefighters who work really hard to serve the great state of Oregon, and that we're not going to stand for it. We're going to vote no. We're going to fight every single day until Election Day to make sure that Measure 106 does not pass, because there's simply too much at stake. Because hundreds of thousands of Oregonians receive their health care through state-funded insurance, and we won't allow that to be chipped away.
I have a totally separate question covered. Suppose there's a young lady. She could be Southeast Portland, but more, for this example, let's say halfway down to Salem and off to the small town, off to the right or left. What could you say to her to motivate her to go to what to expect if she goes to a doctor? We're going to assume this is passing. And what,
Not if we have anything to do with it.
but what would you tell her to say? Go to the doctor. This will happen in regard to money or organ plan or something like that. Is that also part of it, or?
Well, I feel like if I were talking to a young woman, say my age, who lived in rural Yamhill County, so McMinnville, or who lives somewhere in eastern Oregon and who was looking to access care, if I could talk to her today, I would make sure that that she understood what was at stake in this election. So before we get to the point where she's going to the clinic in a world in which Measure 106 passes, I think it's important for young women in particular and younger Oregonians to understand that this is really our first opportunity as voters, as engaged citizens in the state of Oregon to weigh in on this issue in a big way. The last time we voted on anything related to abortion access was 2006. I was not legally allowed to vote at that time. So for me, this really is the first election in which I've been able to make a decision on my ballot that fundamentally affects something that's really personally important to me. And so I think that value is one shared by all Oregon women, but especially younger women. As Anne said, we know that younger women are disproportionately, or maybe not disproportionately, are much more likely than their predecessors to support access to safe and legal abortion. And so I would say to her, you know, the stakes are too high this election for you to sit out, and I really hope that you're going to take the time to get your ballot in the mail, take the time to read your voter's pamphlet, take the time to become an informed voter, and you know, at the end of the day, vote all the way down that ballot to Measure 106 to vote no, and make sure you drop it off by Election Day. I think that's the conversation I would want to have with the young women.
So I have more confidence this is going to pass than maybe you do, but I don't have confidence to do with some of the other measures. Who knows what's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
So one of the things that has come out of this is that I feel like a lot of as we've been canvassing and knocking on doors, we've seen a cross-generational activism that's emerged, right? So I was speaking with someone who is a fifth-generation Oregonian who works as a lactation consultant and as a doula, and she was saying how she took for granted the fact that she lived in Oregon and that she had access to safe legal abortion and that this was not an issue. And now that Measure 106 is on the ballot, she is very shaken and is knocking on doors to talk to voters because she has 2 daughters and she does not want to see abortion access and abortion rights chipped away. She does not want a world in which her daughters have fewer freedoms, fewer options, fewer rights than she does. And as she's knocking on the doors, she's talking to older women who had this fight for her, right? So she's encountering the women who are on the forefront of making sure that the Oregon that she grew up in was an Oregon that respected women and trusted women. And now she's hitting the doors to make sure that the Oregon that her daughters grow up in is that same Oregon. And I think that for me inspires a lot of hope, because I think that as we're talking to folks on the doors, people are angry that this is something that is represented on the ballot. They don't feel like this represents Oregon or its values, and they're going to vote against it. And to just say everyone needs to register to vote by October 16th, midnight, get your updated registrations in. Ballots are dropping on October 17th. Be sure to vote. Be sure to get your ballots in by November 6th. Be sure to vote no on Measure 106.
Be sure to register.
Yeah.
Got a
Yeah.
little detail there
Yeah.
for some that haven't. You know, in the big picture, women that come from small towns and suburbs and big cities, people of every color and every accent, old men, young women, all incomes, all faiths, both parties, all bound by a deep sense of equality and justice, bound by the determination to guarantee women full reproductive freedom, to guarantee women an equal place in our society. It's a campaign for all the men and women who have fought so hard before us, a campaign for the tens of thousands of silent women for whom freedom of choice is their only hope. We're all born of this revolution that women began so long ago in America. We draw strength from their courage. We're emboldened by their determination, by their faith and commitment. Indeed, we are their legacy for the new century. I think about that and I appreciate all those exactly that have gone before. Never gave up. Finally got. Do you know Roe v. Wade passed 7-2, right? Mm. I don't think I can say that enough. And did you know that someone from the Supreme Court called Sarah, the lady that did that, said, "Did you know what was going on up here?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, you won." She didn't know. She went all the way back to Texas. And they had to call her on the phone and tell her. I thought that was fun. Also, she had another funny story. She was in a plane, and on her lapel, she had a little button showing a coat hanger with a red X on it. And the stewardess said, "What have you got against coat hangers?" She had no idea what that meant. What the back alley abortion with coat hangers and all that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, anyway, I think we've made it fairly clear what needs to be done. I only thought no on 106 was the only way you could say it. I didn't know you could say anything else about 106.
It's the most important thing to say about 106 is no.
Right. Right. So, care. Does that mean anything in particular? Care?
Care?
In this case?
Well, for us, it means health care. No cuts to health care. It also means we care about women, we respect women, we trust women, and we're not going to allow for their health care to be compromised or to be restricted in any way, shape, or form.
And that's for everyone.
Yes, and that is for everyone. That is for everyone, not just this is targeted specifically at women, but that is also for everyone.
It's for everyone.
Absolutely.
I think that helps the election.
And I think that's why, I think we've said this before, we see Measure 106 as being such an important thing to defeat this November. It's not just about 106, it's about the precedent we set when we decide to take certain healthcare procedures and carve them out from coverage. I think I said this a couple of times now, but no one should go to receive medical care, whether it's abortion care or reproductive health care of other types, and not have confidence that it's covered by their insurance, just like any other medical procedure. I think it's a dangerous precedent to set, and that's why it's so critical to defeat 106.
What do you think the impact of the Me Too movement has had on your getting out in your canvases? Are you still going in a positive way? Because sometimes, especially now, we're talking about politics now.
Yeah.
We got the presidential election situation aspect of it. People are demonstrating all over the place, routine, and it is kind of like a, right for women, a movement type of aspect of it. But sometimes it can get pretty raw. And then here you got a situation like here that's been fought for years, and trying to get that across. And sometimes that can just work just the opposite. What do you think?
I think that both issues are about bodily autonomy. Both issues are about respecting a person's ability to be in control of their body and what happens to their body. And I think that the intersection of those issues is very close, right? Like, we don't want folks legislating our bodies. We also don't want folks to engage with our bodies without our consent. And I think that those are two very closely aligned, similar sides of a coin, right? It is about respect. I know I've said this a bunch, but it's true. It's about trusting and respecting people to be able to decide how their bodies, what to do with their bodies, what happens to their bodies in healthcare, or in sexual relationships. It's about respecting other people's bodily autonomy. And I think that that is something that our volunteers are also really motivated by across the board.
I only brought that point up because men have to be very much involved in this process to educate them too,
Absolutely.
because they play a vital role. Got me? And maybe sometimes that's a little short in terms of being sold. You know, just like it's my way or the highway. But I think that if you can get people to the table, because that's really where the divide ends, so to speak, and it's such a major divide that folks tend to forget that, and we should talk about inclusivity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very important.
I think everyone can be on board for preserving personal freedom.
Right, right, that's right. Oh, good point.
Yeah, and I think what really speaks to the fact that I think the ability to decide when and whether to become a parent is not an issue that is divided by gender. I think it's an issue that we know 7 in 10 Oregonians, or an estimated 7 in 10 Oregonians, are identify as pro-choice, so they believe that abortion should be safe, legal, and accessible. 7 in 10 Oregonians aren't women, so we know that there are a significant proportion of folks in the state who really fundamentally believe that it is about giving folks the ability to decide for themselves when and whether to become a parent, and you know that we need to trust people to make those decisions. So I feel confident that come November 6th, folks of all political persuasions, backgrounds, folks from across the state of Oregon will be joining us in voting no on Measure 106.
Okay, you're right there.
I remember watching once years ago. There was some issue that, and it had 9 or 10 men, congressmen, senators, whatever, and everyone pointed out this is an issue that involves women. Why are all just men there? And I realized that's right. How could they be so stupid and unfair?
Right.
Yeah, I remember seeing that picture. I said, how could they leave the women out of anything so important? Well, I guess that's why a lot of women started running for office recently. Of course, there's probably a lot of reasons, but I think that's one of them. They saw the need for that.
I think there's been a lot of anger and a lot of hurt that's come out of the last few weeks with the Kavanaugh confirmation. And I think that sometimes it can be really, one can like easily slip into a certain sense of despair and rage. But I think that this ballot measure is a real direct example of how your vote matters, your voice matters. This
right.
is how you take action. If you do not like what you see, you have to turn out to the polls, or in our case, vote by mail, and vote no on Measure 106. But there are also other ways to join a community, to join a movement, to make sure that these values of exclusion, these values of inequity do not make it into our Constitution, and that's to come join us, door knocking, phone banking. We have a huge canvas to talk to voters that's happening on October 20th. Folks should join us. This is too important an issue, and I know I've spoken with a lot of folks who are feeling really terrible about the last 2 weeks in our country, and this is a really tangible, concrete way to make an important impact in your state, in your community. We all know someone who would be impacted by Measure 106. If you're sitting at your kitchen table and you're looking at Measure 106 and you're thinking to yourself, does this apply to somebody in my life? Like, does someone in my life, will they have their access to health care, to abortion care, taken away from them? The answer is yes. Hundreds of thousands of Oregonians will be impacted by this. Folks on the Oregon Health Plan, nurses, teachers, firefighters. The answer is yes. So vote no in November on Measure 106, but also come join us to make sure that this measure does not pass.
What did you say about the 20th?
So on October 20th, we're going to have a canvas. In Portland, it's going to be at SEIU Local 49.
Oh, another one of those.
Yes, so we're going to be gathering groups of volunteers to go knock on the doors and talk to voters and make sure that everyone knows what's at stake this November, and make sure that everyone knows how crucial it is to vote no on Measure 106. Bring your friends, first timers welcome. It's also a really good place to feel in community and in communion with folks who really care. And I think that I know for myself, as times have gotten grim, that's been a huge part of sort of sustaining me as a person in my faith in our democratic institutions. And I think that this is something that is so important. We have to mobilize everyone to make sure that this gets defeated in November.
So that 49, what's the address, and is there a phone number?
So if
they
you
can
go
contact
to nocuts2care.com, if you go to our volunteer tab, you'll have information on how to sign up for this door knocking event as well as others. We're going to be knocking doors on the phones every day until Election Day. We feel very strongly that everyone needs to know about Measure 106, and that when everyone knows what Measure 106 is, which is a backdoor ban on abortion that targets low-income women, they will be voting no in November.
And I think it's specifically important to uplift the fact that the reason that we talk to voters on any campaign is because we want to see everyone exercising their right to vote in the state of Oregon. You know, I would love to continue pushing until every single person in the state of Oregon receives and then returns a ballot on Election Day, but until that happens, we know that this year's election will see a historic turnout in the state of Oregon, and every conversation that you have with a voter about exercising that ability and educating them about what's on the ballot increases the likelihood that they're going to be joining the millions of other Oregonians who are going to be turning in a ballot. And so I think it's really critical that we're out there having those conversations and ensuring that everyone understands what's at stake this election.
Okay, so they need to register.
Yes.
And I like that.
So action items for this evening are register to vote by 10/16, come to our canvas on 10/20 and help get the word out about Measure 106 and how dangerous it is for Oregonians. You can go to nocuts2care.com and figure out ways to get involved and to volunteer. And then on November 6th, make sure that your ballot is in with that no carved into your ballot right next to 106.
Okay, I like that, carve in.
Carved in.
Right. I want to thank you. We're down to about a minute here. Thank you very much for coming.
good.
Thank you for
I
having us.
appreciate your
good.
enthusiasm. I was preparing for this. 'Cause
Yeah.
Sometimes I
He
have
was.
to keep calling.
He was ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this was good. It was good. It informed well.
Yeah, thank you for
and,
giving us the
I thought
opportunity.
that was really good. Really good. Okay.
Both you guys speak well,
Thank you.
and you speak well for this, of course, too. But when this is all over, you're still going to go away and speak well. I want you to know that. Okay, well, we got our thing up there saying we want to thank the crew for making this show possible, and he does all the work.
He sure does.
Yeah,
You did well in front. Two old military guys, Marine Corps and Army over there.
Oh. Well, thank you for joining us and
Oh
for
yeah,
having us.
good.
Very much appreciated it.
Oh, and be sure and take off our.
All right.
Microphones.
Are we done? We
20
still
seconds.
got about 20 seconds more.
We're
Well,
just-
please get out and vote. It's very, very important.
Yeah.
And as they indicated, the 16th is that date.
Well,
For
you
voter
tell them that on
registration.
Sunday.
Yeah,
and
because
tell
that's my
everybody to
birthday.
Oh,
That's my
really?
birthday, 16th of October. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Voting
Everyone
day.
should give you the birthday present of
Right.
Oh, look
registering
at
to
that.
vote.
Well, then she's sharp, boy. She's good. She's a heck of a campaigner. Both of them are.